everyone, this is Stephanie. Happy New Year. I hope everybody is having a great holiday season with their family. I just wanted to jump on here before the episode started and let you know that this is a re-release from an episode we posted on New Year's, probably a couple of years ago. It's the murder of Mike Defino, and it takes place in Alaska. So again, I just wanted to say Happy New Year, let you know we're posting something, and we will see you in the new year with a lot of new episodes. See you later.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, we made it through the Christmas season, and now New Year's Eve is just around the corner.
Yeah, it's coming up quick, 2024.
2024. Yep, it's crazy. Hopefully everybody out there had a good Christmas. We had a great Christmas.
Yeah, we did, and hopefully you guys did too also.
Yep. So today's story is about the murder of Mike Defino in Juneau, Alaska. And we chose this story because the murder happened on New Year's Eve. So, Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. We're starting it with a murder. So yeah, but I kind of looked to see if we could do something similar to like the Halloween and Christmas where we just read articles, but I wasn't really finding anything about. Actually, they were all kind of murder. So I'm like, well, let's just pick one and go with it. And we haven't been to Alaska on this podcast. Yeah. So I'm like, let's go to Alaska. It's funny because when I research and I try to find, because I can do Colorado all day long, you know, but I want to get out of Colorado every once in a while and go to other states. I never think of Alaska.
Yeah.
Ever. And then this one popped up and I'm like, holy smokes, an Italian in Alaska in 1916? Yeah. So this incident, it took place on December 31st, 1915 in Douglas, Alaska. I think Douglas is actually an island right outside of Juneau. So, you know how like there's just all those little...
Right.
Because... Well, we'll get into it, but they have to take the murder to Juneau on a ferry. So I'm thinking that this is an island. I don't know a lot about Alaska, but... So it took place December 31st, 1915, and Nick Faricelli and Mike Defino, they were outside of the Owl restaurant. That's Mom's favorite animal.
Yeah.
You'd probably like that restaurant. And like I said, this is in Douglas, and it was actually 2:30 in the afternoon, right in the middle of the day. Okay, so I just have a quick question because it didn't dawn on me until just now. I kept thinking, wow, this guy just murdered him in the middle of the day. However, isn't it dark in Alaska during certain times of the year?
Yeah, but I'm not for sure.
Me either. Okay, we're going to take a pause and we're going to look this up real quick. So we looked it up, and there is a town that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that's in way northern Alaska that does not see sunlight from November to December, but Juneau does have a little bit of sunlight. He did murder him in broad daylight. Yep. That answers that question. And so Nick walked up to Mike and he shot him 4 times with a .38 caliber revolver. And an Alaska newspaper called this murder, quote, one of the most cold-blooded murders to happen in the North.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that was 1915. All right. So let's dive into all the details about this. Mike Defino, he was born November 3rd, 1863 in Italy. And other than some prison records, I can't find anything on him. I think he came over around 1908 to 1910 is when he came to America, but I can't find anything in the newspaper articles on Ancestry, so I don't know. I found a Maurizio Defino who spent some time in Alaska, and the birth date was fairly close, but I don't know if it's him or not. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Just the prison records or jail records?
Jail records, and I even found his mugshot. So
in Alaska.
Was it Alaska or Seattle?
Oh, but here in the
States. Oh, yeah, it was either Alaska or Seattle. Actually, I want to say it was Alaska, and and I'll actually go over it. It talks about like it shows like his scars and stuff. It almost reminds me of a World War II draft card because they like write down like they have a scar above their left eyebrow and all that. In case they escape jail. So, but yeah, it has his mugshot, and that was all I could find on him was prison records. So, yeah, because on February 6, 1912, he served 20 months in prison for, this is a quote, selling liquor to an Indian. So, like I said, I found his prisoner intake form, and it has a whole list of scars, and I'm going to read that real quick. Okay, so his prisoner intake form, it says prisoner number 2130, offense liquor to an Indian, convicted at Juneau, Alaska, and sentenced 20 months. And then it just kind of goes on and lists like dates, like probable date that he could get out. If he has good behavior, he could get out. Arrested at Douglas Island. So Douglas is an island.
There you go.
And so at this time of his arrest, he was 48 years old. He was 5'5" Let's just say he was 5'5". His weight was 146 pounds, hair black, eyes brown, complexion dark. And then for description, it says scars, a 1/2 inch tip of nose. I don't know what that means. I guess there's a scar at the tip of his nose that's a half.
Missing a 1/2 inch of
That's what I kept thinking. I'm like, is he missing a chunk of his nose? And then a scar 1 1/4 inch above the left eye, 3/4 inch scar top middle forehead. I mean, they're down to like the quarters and 3/4. 1 1/2 inch scar above wrist, 1/2 inch inner side scar on left forearm, clubbed last joint left index finger. So does that mean he lost a part of his index finger? I don't know what clubbed means.
I would assume that.
Me too. That sounds about right. A mole, a 1/4 inch on the left groin. I mean, they got detailed. And then a 1/2 inch hairy mole near left eye, and 2 vaccination marks on left arm. And those are probably smallpox vaccinations. So, like, the scars, you have those, huh? Mm-hmm. Yep. 2 upper central incisor gold crown teeth.
Wow, very descriptive.
Very detailed, especially that one by the, you know.
Well, at least it wasn't the hairy one.
I was thinking the same thing. When I was reading and the next thing was hairy, I was like, oh, please don't be gross. It even came with his mugshot, which I'll post on Instagram. And I was, like I said, I was able to gather that I think it came anywhere between 1908 and 1910. And he worked as a woodcutter when he first got here, and then he worked in the mines. And I'm assuming gold mines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rush.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Right around that time. And so he actually served, this was his second time serving a prison sentence for selling liquor to, again, quote, Indians. In 1910, he served 8 months in an Alaskan jail for this offense. So he was making money, I guess.
So he was brewing his own?
That's what I'm assuming. What I don't understand is, so Mom and I just took another pause and did a little bit more research because we were wondering why he kept getting arrested for selling alcohol. America, like the national prohibition, went into effect in 1920 and ended in 1933. However, some states started prohibition before that, and Alaska started their prohibition in 1916. But Mike Defino, he already died. He was killed in 1915. So then we were like, well, why does he keep getting arrested for, quote, selling alcohol to an Indian? We looked it up, and I think what we found was, because we were wondering, you know, the Inuit people, is that the same as Native Americans? And it kind of sounds like they just labeled
them all.
Exactly, like an umbrella label, and they were all Native Americans. And there was a law passed in 1864 that said, on March 15th, 1864, you were not allowed to exchange, give, barter, or dispose of any type of liquor to a Native American.
Because I've never heard him called an Indian.
Me either, no. And I think probably today we would distinguish them, but back then they were like, all right, well, Mom and I are learning a lot on this podcast. We've paused twice now to research the weather, the Native Americans, the laws. Okay, so yeah, he actually served 2 jail sentences for this. Now, that's kind of the history of Mike. That's about all we got. So when it comes to Nick Faracelli, there's even less information out there on him. There's nothing. I couldn't find anything. So with that being said, we'll just start talking about the murder that happened in broad daylight. So like I said, it was the middle of the day, New Year's Eve. And here's how it happened. Nick Faracelli, he walked up to Mike Defino. He put the revolver against his back and shot him straight in the heart. And Defino, of course, you know, he scrambled away from Nick, and he was still alive at this time and screamed at him, "Don't shoot." But Nick actually fired 4 more shots. And Mike was struck on the right side of his chest and right above the left breast. When Nick fired his first shot, I guess he held the gun so close to Mike that the gunpowder burned his clothes.
Great.
I know, So it was like literally pressing
Right.
against his body. And so Charles Gable, he was a carpenter and he was working across the street at a drugstore, and he witnessed the shooting. So he said that after Nick shot him, he ran off after he fired the last bullet. And he said that he went so fast, it looked like he was running into the water. So it must have just been the angle he was at.
Right.
Because, you know, he said it just looked like he ran straight into the water, which, burr. And so,
Or he
local...
disappeared so fast.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, well, that all
makes
makes
sense.
sense.
Yeah, just disappeared really fast. So local citizens and volunteers, they actually set out to look for Nick. And, you know, you have to think this is 1915, a tiny island in Alaska. You know, there's probably not a lot of police officers like it would be in a city, you know, just walking
that's
around.
true,
So they
yeah.
probably knew they had to take matters into their own hands. And this is December in Alaska, so there was tons of snow on the ground, obviously. And they were able to track Nick because of his footprints in the snow. And so they tracked him to a shed that was behind the general store. And apparently this shed had a, quote, lavatory in it. And now that's a bathroom, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm just kind of wondering, is this just an outhouse?
That's what it sounds like. Maybe it was a large outhouse so they
Oh.
could use it as storage too.
Maybe, yeah. Hey, when you're done in there, bring me the snow shovel. So, but yeah, so anyways, the citizens, they had a feeling he was in there, so they shot off the lock and then, quote, fired off a few shots through the door. So
How did it get locked if he was inside?
that's what I was, well, maybe it had a lock on the inside and they couldn't get in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then they, like, almost like, because I was picturing a padlock at first
Me too, yeah.
but I guess maybe they shot the doorknob more than a lock. So, and so and it just makes me laugh because they just shoot through the door. However, they knew this man had a gun, so maybe they were worried he was going to shoot at them too.
They were hoping it was him, I guess.
I know, it's like, what if you were wrong? It was some poor guy who worked at the general store and had to go to the bathroom. But anyways, it was him. And so they took him to the city jail in Juneau. Well, the police came at that point and then loaded him on the paddy wagon ferry, whatever it is, and took him to the jail in Juneau. I guess the police said that he just looked unconcerned and had a big smile on his face. Like, yeah, no big deal. And then they took Mike's body to Sully's morgue. And the last name was Sullivan, but he just called his morgue Sully's. And so from the interviews with the police, they figured out that all of this started over money, which so many conflicts start over money.
That's right.
Yep. And so now Nick didn't speak English, so that was probably really interesting, and I'm hoping they had to have had some type of a translator. So, I mean, there were Italians in this area, obviously, so hopefully they grabbed one. But apparently, because they had to, they figured out the story. So apparently Mike and Nick, they knew each other through the mines. So they both worked at the Perseverance mine at one point. And during this time, Mike lent Nick $18, which in today's money is about $550. So that's a good chunk of money.
Yeah.
And that's...
You would want it back.
You'd want it back, yeah. And Nick did not pay him back. So a few days before the shooting, Mike approached Nick and asked for his money. And Nick told him that he didn't have any cash on him, but did have a check for $55, which that's about $1,600 today. So Nick gave the check to Mike to cash, and, you know, he said, go cash the check, take your $18. However, of course, Mike needed to return the remainder $37, but Mike failed to do so. I guess when Nick gave him the check, he said, you know, I really need this money, the rest of the money back, because he just learned that his wife and child were sick in Italy. So Mike took the check to Juneau, cashed it, but like I said earlier, he didn't give the money back. In fact, he didn't even come back from Juneau. He just chose to stay there. So Nick went searching for him and found him in a saloon, which that tells you what he's doing with the money,
Yeah.
which is not good. The paper I read actually said that Mike spent the money, quote, getting intoxicated. And now Nick at this point was irritated, but he ended up actually like taking Mike back to Douglas so that they could return to work, which is interesting because, you know, he went to Juneau. He's probably really irritated, but he almost does this like caring gesture of like, hey man, you're in the saloon, you're slosh. Let's get you back to Douglas where you can go back to work and get straight again. I don't know. That's
maybe so he could get his $37.
still $37, exactly.
Granted, he was due some interest, but
He was definitely due some interest. Yeah, it's like you could have bought him a drink. No, I'm just kidding. And so Mike goes back with him, and he promised to withdraw the money and pay Nick back. So a couple of days later, Mike withdrew the money, but went straight to the saloon in Douglas and spent the money there. So obviously, when Nick finds out about this, he's not happy. And he tracks Mike down, and that's when he took his revenge. So Mike was probably walking out of the saloon, and this is how I picture it anyways, and Nick is just waiting for him, and then just walks up behind him and shoots him. So he'd had enough. And so, of course, Nick was booked on a murder charge and was held without bail.
that's kind of gruesome to not even confront him again.
Exactly. Like, give it one more chance. Because maybe he just spent a couple dollars in there and you could get at least some of your money back.
And then shoot him in the back.
And shoot him in the back, exactly. Yeah, which makes me wonder earlier when I was talking about, like, he does this carrying gesture. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't very carrying. It's just how I want to picture it. But it seems, like you said, it's brutal. It's a brutal way to do that. So a few days after the shooting, on January 4th, Mike was buried at the Douglas Cemetery. But the very next day, they dug his body up because federal authorities, who were now for some reason involved, demanded that an autopsy be done. H.V. Sullivan, the guy who ran Sully's morgue, he buried Mike at the cemetery, but as he was leaving the cemetery, a United States Marshal told him that he would have to exhume the body. And so the next day he went out and got the body, and they did an autopsy. And so the Alaskan Daily Empire, they must have got a hold of the autopsy report because they detailed it quite well. And I'm actually going to read that right now. Okay, so like I said, this is in the Alaskan Daily Empire, and they start going over the autopsy. And they start with, an incision was made in the front of the body. The ribs were cut through on each side of the sternum, and it was sufficiently removed to permit a careful inspection of the internal organs. 4 bullets struck. Instead of being struck only twice, as what was first supposed, the autopsy revealed the fact that Defino was hit by 4 bullets. One entered the left side of the back of the head, about 1 inch above the bottom of the lobe of the left ear.
Wow.
I know. So he got shot not only in the back, but the back of the head. The entire course of the bullet was through a roll of flesh just back of the optical bone, but the bone itself was not touched by the bullet. Another bullet entered the back of the left shoulder about 4 inches from the top, followed and course to the right, so like turn to the right, I guess, and slightly upwards, and lodged about 1.5 inches below the surface of the fleshy part of the right shoulder, just to the right of the base of the neck. This was a deep flesh wound, and no bones were touched. Another bullet entered the left side at about the second rib, and about 6 inches from the median line, ranged slightly downward, passing through the ascending aorta, and coming out through the fourth rib, about 1.5 inches to the left of the right nipple.
Very descriptive.
Very descriptive. And the fourth bullet entered the abdomen on the left side, about 3 inches to the left and 3 inches down. So that's a stomach wound. Ooh. And it followed a diagonal course downward and to the right and passed out through the right groin. So like I said, they had to have gotten a hold of the autopsy report and added it in, because that's really detailed. And it goes on for a while, but I'm not going to read all of it because...
Yeah, it's clear he's dead.
Exactly, yes. He's goner. All right. And so based off of this autopsy, they held an inquest and decided to move forward with prosecuting Nick. So now Nick, he was held in the local jail in Juneau, and during this time, he ended up declining mentally. They had to actually send him to a sanitarium, and he was guarded 24/7. It doesn't go into detail about, maybe whether he was violent or suicidal or what was going on with him, but they just said mentally he was declining pretty bad. But by March of 1916, they deemed him sane, and the trial was ready to proceed. Dr. Devine said that Nick had an excitable temperament and was highly emotional, but sane. So he must have spent some time in a sanitarium. They observed him and said, no, we can proceed. They were ready to go, but in April, they ended up pushing Nick's trial back to later on in the summer because authorities ended up catching what was Alaska's first serial killer, and that was an Edward Cross. It's just kind of crazy because, they're ready to proceed with this, but then they catch the serial killer, and they kind of put everything else on hold because they just want to get this serial killer in prison. And so I'm just going to give a kind of a brief history of this Edward Cross guy, because it's kind of interesting. Between 1912 and 1915, just a bunch of single men, probably working in the mines or, fishing or something, ended up disappearing. And a few law enforcement officials in the territory, they were just really confused about this. And they weren't sure what was going on. But by 1915, they started suspecting this Edward Cross. Edward Cross was actually not his name. His real name was Edward Slomke. And he served in the U.S. Army in 1897, but deserted in 1902. Authorities found that over the years, Cross, he would basically murder these men and then take their assets. So their money, their paperwork, IDs, and then he would go kind of all over Alaska and present as somebody other than who he was. And so I think that paper trail is sort of how they started catching him, because he was so he'd have this person's ID who's been missing. The trials actually didn't even end up starting for Cross until the spring of 1917. And since none of his victims were ever found, jurors just found him guilty of kidnapping and robbery. That was enough, and they sentenced him to die by hanging in Juneau. But he was not going to have that, and he actually sawed through the bars of his jail cell and escaped from the Juneau Federal Jail 2 days before his execution. And this launched a huge manhunt. So I think everything else was put off on hold to get this guy tried, and then he escaped. So then everybody's putting their resources to finding him. A homesteader actually ended up killing him. I'm not sure if he was on his property or what, but he killed him and collected a $1,000 reward. So that was the end of Cross.
And that was a good thing too. He was an evil person.
Yeah, he would have probably ended up continuing to kill people. So that would have been bad. And so anyways, with all of that being said, Nick had to wait quite a while for his trial. And again, he mentally declined, but this time it was really bad. In August of 1916, a grand jury commission deemed Nick insane, and he was sent to the Tabor Asylum, which I believe it was in Oregon at that time. And because of this, the murder charges were dropped. And I did read in a paper that if Nick ever left the asylum and they deemed him to be okay to mentally leave, that they would bring the charges back up. But I think he ended up spending the rest of his life there.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
I bet so. Which is, I mean, he had a wife and a kid in Italy, and so I don't really know. He
probably would have found something if he got out.
Probably.
Because they would have brought the murder charges back up.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. I probably would have ran across, retrying, Nick. So that makes sense. But yeah, that was kind of just a shorty but interesting one to start the new year with.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
Two evil people, but
I know. Yeah, they both just didn't make the best choices. So, all right. Well, I hope everybody has a great New Year's, and we'll see you later.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah.
2024.
2024.